a relationship with food that involves eating it in a relaxed, grateful, parasympathetic state, often surrounded by people, with family, with friends. You're chewing your food, you are spending more time eating it, you're giving your digestive system a chance to break it down in terms of the enzymes and the hormones produced. You feel fuller, faster. There's that element of the body being ready to receive food because you're eating it in a glad, grateful state, surrounded by people, not sucking down a superfood smoothie while driving 60 miles an hour down the highway on your way to work.
Ben Greenfield is a New York Times bestselling author, health consultant, and speaker. He has expertise in longevity, anti-aging, biohacking, fitness, nutrition, cognitive performance, positive psychology, and many other aspects of health and wellness. You've created something remarkable, even with your new cookbook, and it's focused around something bigger than just food, funny enough. And you actually, the way that you put it together, you said that it's biohacking meets molecular gastronomy.
That sounds good to me. I just like to use big multi-syllabic words. So yeah, Boundless Kitchen. It's just a bastardization of cooking, basically. You know.
Part of gastronomy, there's many facets of it, but part of it has to do with culture.
Yeah.
And that's the part that really spoke to me, because I have a project that's focused on the same thing, food and culture, and blending those together, but through your lens and your expertise with biohacking, and it's something really special. And if you could, I want to talk a little bit about the inspiration behind creating that, because it's a lot of work to put a cookbook together, as you know, but why did you create it in the way that you did?
Fun work. Yeah. It's my second cookbook, and I love it because in the whole promotional launch, you're cooking all sorts of things that you usually have to eat. There's a ton of new spices and ingredients and cooking methods and tools. I think of cooking the same way I think of language and music, right? Neurogenesis and neuroplasticity and satisfying curiosity and marrying like hedonism to education. And for me as a foodie, writing a cookbook it's not a low lift, but it is an enjoyable lift. Everything from getting the so-called food porn photos back from the test kitchen to hearing that they made the baked donut recipe better with a half teaspoon extra baking powder to, then seeing all the photos and it come to life. And like you, I've read your cookbook, the family cookbook. And like you, I don't just like to give someone a recipe. I like to teach you, why are you eating organ meats, or why are you choosing grass-fed, grass-finished, or what are the properties of these different mineral-rich nutrients, or why would we pay attention to the gel-like hydrating water consistency of produce that's rich in structured water, or compounds like sea moss gel, or shirataki noodles, or whatever. So I think it's super fun, and the inspiration for it was literally just to take what I like to do anyways, and kind of like Kevin Kelly's 1,000 True Fans concept. It's like, well, if I like to do these crazy things in the kitchen, there's got to be at least 1,000 other people who might enjoy taking out sous vide and trying out a 72-hour brisket recipe to see what happens when you do something other than the barbecue grill.
Yeah. Oh man. And also your family's a part of this as well. Your kids. And why is it important, especially today? It's on the endangered species list a little bit of, kids being in the kitchen and being involved in food preparation. And it's a skill set. So why is it important from your perspective to teach our kids about food preparation?
It is a skill set, and it's something that Mom and I have really emphasized from an early age, very early age. Here, when they could barely even stand, take this pinch of sugar and put it into the pancake recipe, or Dad's gonna hold you in an arm and hold this whisk in your hand, and you're gonna stir the gravy, and just giving them a real intimate relationship with food from an early age, culminating in, I believe it was when Tim Ferriss published his book on learning, The 4-Hour Chef, which some people think is a cookbook. It's a book about learning. It's a great book. But there is a spread in that book with something like 32 different variations of scrambled eggs, right? Moroccan scrambled eggs with cumin and coriander, and Greek scrambled eggs with feta cheese and tomatoes, and Japanese scrambled eggs with, nori and kombu and dolce. And so I brought my sons through the process of making a good scrambled egg and then spicing it accordingly. And they began to make themselves scrambled eggs every morning for breakfast. Now they're way beyond that. They're scones and biscotti and Dutch babies and things that I'm not much of a baker, but they bake and make these highly complex recipes from scratch. But it began with just making them a little part of each recipe and then starting with a simple protein with the right spices and herbs to make it unique. Scrambled eggs. I think that's a great place to start a kid, is something like scrambled eggs. And the benefit of it for a kid, I think most importantly, is they don't fear food. How many adults do you know who fear food, who just don't even know what to look for? How many clients have you worked with in nutrition who go to a restaurant, they're just like, well, I don't quite know. I read the list, but I'm not sure. Do I order the Greek salad or the Asian coleslaw with the chicken, or do I do the burger and do I leave the bun off, or do I do the sourdough bun? So it's very confusing as we age if we haven't developed an understanding of the ingredients and the components of food from an early age. That's part of it, is just a real healthy relationship with an understanding of food, ingredients, and nutrients so that a child knows how to feed themselves in an intelligent manner. Then there's the learning process, right, which I already alluded to. Just the fact that it's a great place to learn. My kids are homeschooled, right, so it can count as math when they're putting together a baking recipe and learning metrics and measurements and volumes. It can count as social studies when they're learning to cook pasta when we get back from Italy, having taken cooking classes, and it could also count as language. There is problem resolution. There's the need to find substitutions. There is lifestyle-based education by needing to go to the grocery store and shop around for ingredients, in aisles on your own while mom's in a different section of the grocery store. There's so many components of it that involve a learning process. And then I think finally, like a big part of it is just like independence. Like my sons can wander into the kitchen. They don't need DoorDash and they don't need Uber Eats and they don't need a Hot Pocket, and they can go in there and craft a meal all the way down to cooking, fine, French dinners for mom and I on our anniversary. They select a different room of the house each year for our anniversary. We've been married 21 years. They've been doing this for about 11 years, and they put together a recipe list and a menu and get a special room of the house ready with a table and photos and candles and a multi-course dinner. That's a pretty extreme example of independence, but they can do that for themselves. They don't have to be fed. They know how to go harvest plants from the backyard. They know how to bow hunt. They know how to go out in the chest freezer and choose what they want to have for dinner that night. If mom and dad are out on a date, they have friends over and they teach their friends how to cook and make desserts and scones and baked goodies and pies and cakes and cookies. And they do have a little bit of a sweet tooth, I have to admit. They take after their mother. But those would be a few examples. Would be the comfort with food and the intimate relationship with it, the learning process, and then the independence that's fostered.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the alternative. When our kids don't have that skill set, and what we're seeing today, and I shared that study in my recent book as well. This was published in JAMA in 2018, 20-year analysis of ultra-processed food consumption by U.S. kids. It's near 70% of the average kid's diet in the United States is ultra-processed food. And of course, there's going to be people on different ends of the spectrum, but it's a serious issue. And I want to talk a little bit about that with you in particular, because you have such an incredible insight into the world of food and nutrition. Why are these, I struggle to even call them foods, being such a big part of our kids' diet? Why is that detrimental?
Well, again, it's multifactorial, but I would say some of the main things that come to mind is, first of all, when you look at the field of neuromuscular dentistry and you look at books like Jaws or the work of the Weston A. Price Foundation, you see that consumption of soft, processed, easily chewable or swallowable foods result in a detriment to the formation of the teeth and the jaw structure from early on in age, all the way down to kids who aren't breastfed properly or for a long enough period of time, not having the proper jaw strength, experiencing teeth crowding, eventually later on in life having to deal with the downfalls of mouth breathing, including most notably and concerningly sleep apnea, right? So as far as the way that a child's face is built, you essentially have a high risk of a child becoming a mouth breather who needs more dental work, who struggles more with crowding of the teeth, who may not even have, as much as I think this might be considered a shallow observation, the type of beauty and symmetry that's often valued in human societies. Like there's a lot that you're sacrificing by giving a child these hyper palatable foods that might be easier for you to spoon feed to them, but that ultimately don't help them develop the proper teeth, mouth, and jaw structure. It's not as though you cannot, through dental work, through mouth guards, through proper alignment, working with a holistic or biological dentist, using mouth strengthening or jaw strengthening devices, chewing gum like mastic gum, etc., redevelop a lot of those muscles later on in life. You would also want to ensure that you're getting a high amount of fat-soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K, which is primarily based on a lot of the work by the Weston A. Price Foundation. That's critical for teeth formation and for a healthy jaw and bone structure, and you don't find a lot of those in ultra-processed foods. You find a lot more sugars and, in many cases, seed oils or high amount of carbohydrates. So I think the first concern would be the jaw and the mouth and the teeth and the mouth breathing and the sleep apnea and the things that occur later on in life. I don't think it's any secret. You look at work of somebody like Vani Hari, the food babe, right? She recently wrote a book about this. All of the things that you find in the Gerber snack bites, which are basically like baby Cheetos, or the Gerber baby food, which is essentially almost like liquid soda with seed oils added in. And there's a lot of problems with these companies that are using cheap ingredients, artificial flavors, preservatives, etc., that will either result in nutrient deficiencies, some type of toxin buildup, or seed oil buildup in the body, or both. And there are ways around this. Like, there is a concept, my wife did this with our sons, right? You take organic fruits and vegetables from farmers market and local produce, and you mash them together and you puree them and you blend them and you pour them into freezer bites, and you make your own kind of like flash frozen baby food that you can then add fish oils to, or olive oil or avocado oil, or avocados in some of the recipes. There are companies like Serenity Baby Foods, for example. They have baby food pouches and little snack bites that are actually healthy. They use a higher amount of omega-3 fatty acids, a higher amount of protein, less sugar, less seed oils, no seed oils. And so there are done-for-you options out there besides Gerber. But I think that the next thing you got to be aware of is nutrient deficiencies combined with a lot of artificial compounds that might not serve the child. And then I think the last thing that comes to mind is, again, back to the intimate relationship a child develops with food and the lack of fear of food that they get when engaged with cooking at an early age. You can also see a little bit of a psychological, dopaminergically driven addiction to hyperpalatable foods with colors, with cartoon characters where the eyes are specifically designed to look at the child from the grocery store shelf as they walk by, so they want to put it in their cart, to the fun of opening a crinkly, shiny package, to biting into a Pop-Tart or pouring a colorful box of cereal. And again, like I'm not saying that there aren't some healthy alternatives of packaged foods, because there are. Like, you hear about, I don't know, Magic Spoon cereal, or there's different Pop-Tart companies out there that are kind of sort of decent. But when you step back and look at it, ideally a child should be educated from an early age on eating food as close to nature as possible, not food that you open out of packages. It's one thing that drives me crazy. I know you do a lot of work in the nutrition industry, is how much of a focus there is on food labels and interpreting food labels, when my take on it is you shouldn't actually be eating a lot of food that has food labels on it in the first place, right? Our pantry is mason glass jars full of seeds and nuts and oatmeal and grains and dirt cheap food from the dry bin at the grocery store that you cook, but it doesn't have a food label on it. And when you shop around the perimeter of the grocery store, like a lot of times when it's in your refrigerator, the produce and the crisper doesn't have the exact calories and carbs and protein ratios. Like, I make water kefir and I make yogurt and I make all these little ferments at home, and there's not a lot lot of like scannable food labels in the refrigerator in the pantry in the first place. And I think it's important that a kid develop a relationship with food that doesn't look like it just came off the shelf of the grocery store.
Yeah. A huge insight is that the ingredient, if you're going to see some labels, the ingredient list is far more important than the so-called nutrition facts.
Oh yeah.
To pay attention what's actually in this.
Right. This is 12% fat, but where's the fat from? Like
Exactly.
Is it canola oil or or avocado oil, or is this, I can't believe it's not butter or ghee or whatever.
Exactly. And, again, with gastronomy and being tied to culture, I want to ask you about this because there's a lot of conversation going on now about these blue zones. Fortunately, the work has been out for quite some time. And even prior to the advent of the blue zones, researchers had identified certain spots around the world where people tend to live longer and healthier lives. And now it's kind of zeroed in on the food and the food quality, but it's getting expanded and we're looking at the culture around it. You've got an important perspective about it that goes beyond what people are being fed about blue zones. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so there's a lot that you can learn from the blue zones data. The thing I like about it is that because you're spreading the observations around the planet from Loma Linda to Sardinia to Nicoya to Okinawa, you're seeing a less myopic focus on low carb, high fat, high carb, low fat, vegan, paleo, carnivore, whatever, even though it does seem to be skewed a little bit towards plant-based diets as far as being the champion of a lot of these blue zones, which is interesting because if you look at the actual data, there is a pretty high consumption of everything from meat, particularly fermented meat products, fish, eggs, grass-fed, grass-finished meat. Fermented dairy is huge in a lot of these cultures. And so I'm not sure if it's, politically driven or what, but I think that there is sometimes a little bit of an impression that people get that you got to eat vegan or plant-based to be one of the blue zones. And the fact is they are eating meat and dairy-based products, but they're far different than a Beyond Burger or a Big Mac. Like, we're talking about fermentation and dry aging and wet aging and and dairy from naturally raised animals, and even the consumption of a high amount of organ meats, rich in life extending glycine versus the potentially age accelerating amino acid methionine. And so there's a lot there, but when you step back and look at common characteristics of the blue zones, you do see things that no matter what diet you eat are going to pop up over and over again. For example, a high intake of a wide variety of herbs and spices and even plants, right? Not a strict plant-based diet, but eating sometimes over 100 different varietals. Diversity. So the amount of polyphenols and flavonols and even so-called plant defense mechanisms that you're getting exposed to in small amounts on a regular basis to induce cellular resilience, you see that. You see in many cases, and I know this confuses a lot of people, but microdosing with some type of alcohol, right? Bitters and digestifs and different liqueurs like, the wild plant extracted Croatian Palankovic or Italian Ebo Libo, or these type of liqueurs that are nearly medicinal, or even just organic biodynamic wine that's grown using old world methods with less pesticides and herbicides and a higher concentration of antioxidants, lower concentration of sugars. You see some semblance often of fasting, either religious fasting or detoxification-based fasting or community-based fasting. You look at like the Mediterranean diet. A lot of people think that's, unlimited breadsticks and giant refills of salad bowls from Olive Garden. But my dad, he practices the Eastern Orthodox religion. And like half the year, he's on some kind of a protein-restricted, oil-restricted fast, right? Which I guarantee is definitely correlated with limited activation of mTOR, some amount of lifespan extension. And there's obviously a sweet spot with protein, and excess protein restriction can result in frailty or sarcopenia. But taking a break from food and having that systematically woven into a society, I think that's smart as well. Perhaps most importantly, from a food standpoint, you see a relationship with food that involves eating it in a relaxed, grateful, parasympathetic state, often surrounded by people, with family, with friends, meaning that you and I know this, like when you're talking and playing games and with family at the dinner table, you're chewing your food, you are spending more time eating it, you're giving your digestive system a chance to break it down in terms of the enzymes and the hormones produced. You feel fuller faster. You know, when you're playing an hour-long game of Monopoly at the dinner table, you'd think you'd go back for seconds or thirds, but for me, you know, I take a half hour to eat that first course because I'm too busy building up my properties, and I'm full by the time I'd normally be going back for seconds because I'm eating too quickly. And so there's that element of the body being ready to receive food because you're eating it in a glad, grateful state, surrounded by people, not sucking down a superfood smoothie while driving 60 miles an hour down the highway on your way to work. You know, your body receives that food far differently. When you throw some of those variables in with things like sunlight exposure, nature exposure, walking your whatever pack of goats to the top of a mountain in the morning, you know, natural water intake, low intake of processed packaged foods like we talked about earlier, low intake of seed oils, and generally more natural lifestyle, I think that you create a scenario where you can have a really long-lived person. And, you know, granted, there are exceptions to that, like the gin-chugging, cigarette-smoking grandma in Sardinia who's like 110 years old. But then again, even that person is getting a lot of physical activity in the sunshine, with family, with friends. You and I were talking a little bit about cancer before we started recording, and I even read this whole new book. Actually, I don't know if it's new, but it's a book called Anti-Cancer Living, and it goes into the fact that the top variable related to lower risk of getting cancer or better odds of beating cancer is human connectivity, meaning being around people. And so I don't know if there are any studies about this, but I would love to see like a measurement of, let's say, like inflammatory cytokines, gut inflammation, and rise in cholesterol or blood sugar when you're eating, I don't know, a supersized Big Mac meal with your friends and your family sitting around the dinner table laughing and enjoying a game versus just like hoovering it over lunch while you're checking emails. And I would imagine there's even like a little bit of a protective effect of human connectivity when it comes to eating junk food.
Yeah. We know this to be true. And now, of course, we're using new scientific method to affirm these very logical things. And, you know, one of the things that you said several times already is you said the F word. You said fermented.
Oh yeah.
All right.
Love fermentation.
And you also said another potentially dirty word. You said bread earlier. You said sourdough. Now let's talk about the difference, because in the blue zones, for example, a couple of them, they're eating bread. They're eating grains, but these particular foods have been, for some folks, categorized as totally off limits and even dangerous. Let's talk about sourdough. And also, this is in your book as well.
My wife's world famous sourdough fermentation bread recipe. Yeah, there are some people who think that many of these populations live long despite their grain intake, not because of it. When you step back and look at the polyphenol content, even some of the hormetic compounds, some of the nutrient density in properly prepared grains, I do think they offer an advantage. And there are some super grains out there. For example, Dr. Jeffrey Bland, the father of functional medicine, now raises a grain called Himalayan tartary buckwheat. It's one of the only flours that we now cook with because it's so nutrient dense. It's naturally gluten-free, has less of the concentrated cellular defense, plant defense mechanisms in it, and it's a fantastic grain. You know, we use a lot of Palouse red wheat too, which is kind of like an ancient grain, like einkorn. And when I use terms like ancient grains, that means many of them have not been bred for high yield crop or genetically modified, meaning they're less capable of irritating the gut, and they're less concentrated in lectins, like gluten, for example. So the source of the grain that you're fermenting is important. But fermentation in general it's an old school method of preparing food in a manner that pre-digests the food, that unlocks nutrients, and that even in some cases concentrates bacteria that are beneficial to the gut. So I've been making yogurt for the past 3 years on my counter. You know, you can use a yogurt maker, you can use a food dehydrator. In a pinch, you can use an oven on a very low setting, and it simply involves, and in my case, I like coconut milk. I don't do that well with dairy. We have goats. I do okay having some of the goat milk and goat yogurt every once in a while, but I do better with coconut milk. So I use coconut milk. I use these little tablets from Amazon called Biogaia. It's Lactobacillus reuteri. And I crush those up and I put it into the milk. And then I add a little bit of sugar and I put that in a food dehydrator or yogurt maker for about 36 hours. When it finishes, I stir in gelatin to make it really thick, like Jell-O. And I always have a batch of yogurt. And there's, you go to Erewhon, you pay like $30 for a mason glass jar of like really high-end coconut yogurt or goat's milk yogurt or whatever. I'm making this for less than $1 for an equivalent batch at home. So I constantly have a batch of yogurt going, and amazing studies on this L. reuteri strain. For example, real culprit for gas and bloating in a lot of people is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, SIBO. And Dr. William Davis, who introduced me to this recipe, has seen eradication of SIBO by consuming a cup of this yogurt over a 4-week period of time. Helps you sleep better, helps produce oxytocin. That's one example. I also make water kefir, which gives you nice, beautiful, slippery poops every morning, and it's fantastic for the gut, and it can be used as a cocktail alternative in the evening. I got dirt cheap water kefir grains from a company called Cultures for Health. Only have to buy them once, because as long as you don't let them die, you can just keep your batch going over and over again, and they grow like chia pets. You can give them away to friends. All I do for my water kefir is I have a really big mason glass jar on the counter, and I put my water kefir grains into it, and then I like to use coconut water. Some recipes call for water and sugar, but I find the composition of coconut water, not only does it have a good enough amount of sugar to feed the water kefir, but I like the flavor. It's like a richer, creamier flavor. So I use this Once Upon a Coconut company, because their cans are lower in BPA, and they also do these they have larger plastic containers as well. And I do about 5 cans of that in the glass jar over the water kefir grains, keep that on the kitchen counter for 48 hours until when I stir with a spatula and put my ear to it, it's nice and fizzy. If I leave it out longer for that, I'll get a little alcoholic. So you have a fun time with your kefir if you leave it out for too long. But I like about 48 hours. And then I strain the kefir grains out, and I put them in a little sugar water in the fridge to save them for the next batch. And I put the water kefir in the fridge. And that's the equivalent of about 4 of the $6.99 bottles of water kefir you get at Whole Foods or whatever. But that's like a quarter for me to make all of that. Maybe a little bit more if you're using coconut water, but it's not that expensive. So that's another example. And then you can also use milk kefir. You're doing exactly what I just described, but you use milk kefir grains and like goat milk or cow milk instead of water or coconut water. I like to use that as a meat marinade. It also really makes eating organ meats taste fantastic. If you want to make like crispy, like some of the best like Southern style fried chicken you've ever had, you actually soak the chicken in kefir for 24 hours and then take it out and shake it up in the paper bag with the egg and the flour and everything. And it just makes the chicken taste amazing, because the kefir enzymatically degrades some of the chicken, draws some of the gamey flavor out, makes the inside moist, the outside crispy. And then finally, there's the sourdough bread, which is, the process of sourdough fermentation actually pre-digests a lot of the gluten, breaks down a lot of the phytic acids and enzyme inhibitors that are in a grain, and you get this nice, crispy, chewy, gut-friendly bread that a lot of people who have gluten issues tend to digest a lot better. If you have celiac disease, you still can't eat grains. It's just how you're genetically hardwired. But the sourdough process of fermentation makes bread way healthier. And oh my gosh, when like my wife makes a new batch of sourdough bread twice a week, and I just slather that thing with like bone marrow and honey and sea salt and use it as like a delivery portal for olive oil and squash and soups. And it's some of the best stuff ever. I will literally have like sourdough bread with a bunch of honey and peanut butter and salt on it for dessert. I mean, it's amazing.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Holy moly. Now, you mentioned, for example, utilizing ancient grains versus what the is Wonder Bread? What is that?
I don't know if Wonder Bread is actually a food or if it comes from space. I don't know. It's a highly, highly refined grain that they've basically stripped out a lot of the nutritional components of, I believe, the bran and the germ. And the result is a hyper palatable, super chewy, readily processed food. If you put a piece of Wonder Bread in your mouth, you can almost taste it dissolve into sugar. People don't even know this about a lot of whole wheat bread you buy from the grocery store. The sugar-raising glycemic index of that
higher.
is like higher than candy bar.
Yeah.
It's nuts. And sometimes higher than the white bread.
Yeah.
So yeah, bread, it can be candy more or less in terms of the way that your body interprets it. And just imagine you take 2 pieces of white Wonder Bread and you put a little jam in the middle and
oh man,
you know,
you're jammed.
just basically like a diabetic sandwich. Yeah.
Oh man. Now, is Wonder Bread coming from an ancient grain?
I doubt that would fit within their margins. Highly doubt that it would come from a super grain.
Yeah, we both talked with William Davis, and he shared with me years ago is essentially there's this like, it's kind of like a genetically altered dwarf wheat, just making the process so much easier to churn out this Wonder Bread.
Yeah.
And you know, bunny bread, that was our jam as well.
Yep, I remember bunny bread. I used to play a lot of tennis in Lewiston, Idaho, where I grew up, and between the tennis center and my house was the little like Hostess Twinkies bakery that had all the old school, like they were like the Debbie's cupcakes and the Twinkies and the red Twinkies and the chocolate with the white filling. I would always drop in there. Yeah, I always drop in there and get a baked goodie, and then the way back or two would always drop into McDonald's and get some kind of a big old, you know, supersized meal from there. So yeah, I grew up on this stuff. You know, it wasn't until I was probably, I started taking nutrition classes in college. It really probably wasn't until I was like 24. I've been married to my wife 3 years at that point. She had really bad acne and eczema, and she came home from the library at University of Idaho one day with this book called The Dietary Cure for Acne by this guy named Loren Cordain, who I later found out was like the father of the paleo movement. And she just kind of cleaned up her house, right? All of a sudden, like the milk got replaced with natural milk from a local farmer, and there was less bread in the house, and there was more olive oil and a lot more good meat, and it kind of got a little paleo-ish. And I started to feel fantastic, and her acne like cleared up nearly overnight. And that was when I really started to think beyond just the macronutrient, back to the food label type of thing. You know, that's the education that you get in a typical secular university, public university, as far as what you learn about nutrition. You know, it was then that I really began to tap into, like, how did our ancestors eat, and how have we strayed from that, and what does food processing do, and what do seed oils do, and, you know, how can we eat closer to the earth? But yeah, for me it was like 23, 24 years old.
Yeah it's about the same for me as well. And I had taken a nutritional science class at that point. And again, we're kind of, I wouldn't even say that we're lacking in education. We're kind of miseducated in a lot of different pieces. But it was that outside of the classroom education and consuming all these books. And this is the cool thing about today, and learning from people like you know, like you get to learn from true experts, like the top people in their respective fields about this stuff. And not to downplay the role of, you know, my professor in my nutritional science class, but little did I know General Mills had contributed to our, you know, funding for the education for the class, for the program, and they're one of the primary producers of ultra processed foods. And the same thing too.
Are you saying that lobbying can influence the educational process?
I mean,
never.
If it looks like a duck.
Thing. Yeah.
If it looks like a duck,
never seen a coffee cup with a pharmaceutical company label on my doctor's desk. Never seen that.
But we had a Hostess, basically a thrift store right by my friend's house. And so same thing, we go there because honey buns were like maybe 99 cents, but you can get like 2 for 99 cents or 4 for 99 cents, and just rack up on all these different things, all these grain products.
I got to ask you though, is there still one that, either based on childhood experiences and palatability and that dopaminergic response or comfort food response, that you still go back to? Like, is there something, if it winds up in your house, you're like, I have no resistance, I'm going to eat it?
You know what, man? I think maybe a part of it is that I don't see it. I don't see this stuff.
Yeah.
But there are certain things that I think about that I can taste, and it's just like, damn. Which is like, one of those is like Fruit Loops, right? Apple Jacks.
Yep.
Those cereals is just like, oh
the
man,
milk from Peanut Butter Captain Crunch.
There's this guy, Tony Baker, this comedian. He's like, he believes that cereal is the true soul food, all right? Because of it's so diverse. It's always there for you. It never ruins a meal. You know, it's like it's always an appropriate time for cereal. And a lot of my cereal eating was actually in the evening. You know, it wasn't this breakfast cereal thing.
Yeah.
But man, that is some of the, you mentioned it earlier, just the marketing towards our kids and how addictive it is. Like I'm literally right now, as we're talking about this, like I know that like I was addicted.
Oh yeah, big time. And you know, like, you know, not that, you know, this podcast I don't believe is sponsored by them or anything, but there are some companies like I forget the name of one company that recently sent me some really good like chocolate Fruit Loopy cereals. Another one was Magic Spoon. Right? Like my son literally like pours a bowl of Magic Spoon cereal and puts a bunch of goat milk in there, and you know, it's still processed food. You know, they still got some cold expeller pressed sunflower oil in there, but I mean, by all measures, it's pretty healthy stuff, and so they're still getting that you know comfort food type of flavor, that nostalgic flavor that we all grew up with, but in a little bit healthier way.
Yeah, so, that's the cool thing about today too, is that just upgrading things. You know, taking something that is a big part of our culture and let's do it a little bit better, but still recognize what it is. But we can do this a lot better without all the side effects.
Yeah.
Is there anything?
For me, it's carrot cake, by the way.
Carrot cake.
I will eat
Bugs
carrot
Bunny.
cake. Like it could be full on like gluten bomb, canola oil. If somebody leaves a slice of that in the fridge, it's gone.
What's up,
And
Doc?
my family makes me carrot cake on my birthday, which is coming up on December 20th. So at the time we're recording this, about 23 days or so. And I will literally like eat that carrot cake that they make me. It's beautiful. It's like a, you know, goat milk colostrum cream cheese frosting, and they use the ancient grains and the carrots, which technically makes it a vegetable, and you know, maple syrup and cinnamon and nutmeg, and it's like a really great carrot cake. I will have that for like breakfast, lunch, and dinner until it's gone, and it's usually gone within about 24 hours.
That's crazy,
It's an
pants.
amazing day.
Well, by the time folks are hearing this around, then you're going to be full of cake. And but also by that time, a lot of folks are going to get their hands on this amazing book. Is there anything else you want to share for people that they can look forward to in Boundless Kitchen?
Well, besides the carrot cake acai bowl that's in there.
Come on now.
You know, I think probably one thing that I mentioned earlier that seems to be difficult for a lot of people is what I would consider to be one of nature's most nutrient-dense multivitamins, and that is organ meats. And I think that they can be delicious. You just have to know what to do with them. And they're inexpensive. A lot of butchers nearly give them away for free because nobody wants them, you know, in our day and age, even though, you know, years ago you hear stories about how the Native Americans would have given a lot of the muscle meat to the dogs and eaten the prized organ meats as the main nutrients, you know, for the warriors and the people who actually needed it to stay alive. And it's back to the, you know, part of it is the high amount of fat-soluble vitamin content in organ meats. Part of it is the high amount of glycine, that amino acid that I mentioned is a little bit more life-extending than the methionine that you find concentrated in muscle meat. But you just have to know what to do with it because it's weird. I can tell you, like, very simplistically, to cut straight to the chase, and there's more details in the cookbook, but the best way to do it is you get whatever organ meat you're going to cook, like let's say liver or heart or kidney, right? Two perfect examples, three good ones to start with. You take it out of the package and you rinse it, and then you take either buttermilk or kefir and you soak it for 24 hours. And I like to soak it in either just like a glass Pyrex container, or even better, a bag that you can buy off of Amazon called a stasher bag. It's a heat-resistant plastic, and in a moment I'll tell you why I like to use that. And after 24 hours, you rinse it and rinse the kefir off. And then what I like to do is I'll take one of those stasher bags and I put the organ meat into it, liver or kidney or heart or whatever, and I put whatever spices I want in there. You know, whether it's, you know, traditional like onion, garlic, thyme, rosemary, or you could get crazy with, you know, paprika and black chili and lime and, you know, and you know, hot sauce, you know, whatever you want to do. It's like mix and match. Once you've got it into the bag with your spices, and I like to throw a little oil and vinegar in there as well, because I can take the liquids and put them aside after cooking it to make a nice little gravy or sauce, is I drop it into a bucket of water. And I have this cheapo little tool that simulates what high-end kitchens use called a sous vide wand. It's made by a company called Jewel, and it holds the temperature of the water consistent over as long a period of time as I want. So let's say I want to have like melt in your mouth tender heart for dinner that night. Heart's super rich in protein and coenzyme Q10 and mitochondrial supporting compounds. It's fantastic. I'll put it in the bag, and I'll put, like, let's say some paprika, some cayenne, maybe a little cinnamon to spice it up, a little bit of olive oil, a little bit of balsamic vinegar, and I'll seal up the bag, I'll put it in the water, walk away at 9 a.m., come back, 20 minutes before dinner, take it out of the bag, set aside the juices in a little pot for a little gravy or sauce later on, and then I'll just get out the, like a serrated knife, cut it into slices, throw it for about 2 minutes per side in butter on a skillet, and I've got like fried buttered heart that's melt in your mouth tender, that's spiced, that's ready, and it literally took me like all in about 15 minutes to make. Put it in the kefir bag, take it out of the kefir bag, put it in the other bag, drop the spices in, drop it in water, walk away, 2 minutes per side. And I mean, it's once you realize like how flavorful and how much of a culinary adventure organ meats can be, and you start to realize, oh, I could just like sous vide and spice and like walk away and do a quick butter grill. It's amazing. Like, it's life-changing.
So these are all insights that you're sharing in the new cookbook, and along with, how many recipes are in there?
I don't know. I should know that. Shouldn't I? I think there's about 50 to 60 recipes in both of my cookbooks.
Yeah. The photos
and the
are
new
beautiful.
one's called Boundless Kitchen.
Yeah, the photos are beautiful, and the food looks delicious. I can't wait to eat a meal with you. And can you let people know where they can pick up a copy?
It should just be at boundlesskitchen.com, I believe. Unless something's broken, it should be there. Or on Amazon.
Boundlesskitchen.com, and of course, Amazon is a trusty retailer for books. That's how they started off. Now it's everything.
Yeah.
You can get a Christmas tree, or you can get coyote piss. And that's a true story.
Really?
Yes.
Can I get coyote piss on my Christmas tree? So I'm in. I actually almost shot a coyote yesterday morning. I almost shot a coyote.
Well, this is what, when I say stuff to you, there's going to be something that comes out
I was
of that.
waiting for a deer, but a coyote walked right in. We have chickens, so I was just about to just like pull back my bow and shoot him. But I thought, you know what? If I do that, I'm not going to be hunting a deer today. So.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, you can get it for like fending off raccoons, like they're scared of the pee. But that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
And that's in our next conversation.
All right.
My guy.
Next time, you, me, and some coyote piss.
Boundlesskitchen.com and Amazon. Pick up a copy today. The one and only Ben Greenfield.
Thank you, sir.
Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here.
About a quarter of the UK population have this parasite called blastocystis. And it turns out it's associated with good health. And if you've got this parasite, you have less internal fat, you have less obesity,